There's a woman in her book club who just turned 82. Last month she carried her own groceries up 3 flights of stairs, remembered every plot twist in a novel none of the rest of us could keep straight, and out-argued her grandson about politics for 20 minutes and won. Nobody calls her spry for her age. They just call her sharp. Independent. Herself. Here's the question this video is really asking. What actually separates people like her, people who are thriving between 75 and 85, from people the same age who are struggling to get through the day? It's not genetics alone. It's not luck. Research on aging keeps pointing to the same 6 things over and over, 6 abilities that quietly predict who stays independent, sharp, and steady into their 80s, and who doesn't. Stick with me to the end, because sign number 5 is the one almost nobody talks about, and it might matter more than any of the others. Why this matters more than ever. Turning 75 today doesn't mean what it meant 50 years ago. Life expectancy has stretched out, and a growing number of people are spending 15, 20, even 25 years in what used to be called old age. The real question was never will I live a long time? It's what will those years actually look like? Researchers who study aging have a name for the split they keep finding. Some people experience what's called successful aging, staying functional, connected, and engaged well into their 80s and beyond. Others experience a much steeper decline, even at the same chronological age. Age on paper turns out to be a pretty weak predictor. What matters more is a small cluster of everyday abilities. Here's the encouraging part. None of these 6 signs require you to have been a marathon runner or a genius. They're built from ordinary daily habits, which means at almost any age they can still be built or rebuilt. Let's get into them. Sign 1. Staying physically active. The single strongest predictor researchers keep finding for staying independent after 75 isn't diet, and it isn't supplements. It's physical function, specifically walking speed, leg strength, and balance. Large studies following people in their 80s have found that measures like grip strength, how fast someone walks, and how easily they can rise from a chair predict who maintains independence years later and who doesn't. In one long-running study of people averaging 85 years old, physical performance was one of the strongest predictors of health outcomes over the following 2 years, on par with how someone rated their own health. This isn't about becoming an athlete at 78. It's about staying in the range researchers call moderate to high functional fitness, the zone where your muscles, heart, and balance are still strong enough to keep you doing the things you actually want to do. Gardening, playing with grandchildren, traveling, simply getting up off the floor if you need to. The people who stay strongest into their 80s are rarely the ones who exercise hardest. They're the ones who move consistently. Daily walks, taking the stairs when possible, standing up and sitting down a few extra times while watching TV. Gardening, dancing. Strength training deserves a special mention, because after about age 60, muscle mass and strength decline faster than most people realize, and that decline accelerates with inactivity, not with age itself. Even light resistance work, using your own body weight, resistance bands, or light weights 2 or 3 times a week, has been shown to meaningfully slow that decline. Balance work matters just as much, because falls are one of the biggest threats to independence in this age group. Something as simple as practicing standing on one foot while brushing your teeth, or a slow-paced practice. Like Tai Chi, measurably improves balance and lowers fall risk. If you're still walking regularly, climbing stairs without having to think about it, and carrying your own groceries, that's not a small thing. That's one of the strongest signals of healthy aging there is. Sign 2. Maintaining independence. The second sign is about function, not just fitness. Can you still manage your own daily life? Cooking, managing money and medications, driving or arranging your own transportation, keeping your home in order. Researchers track these closely because they're one of the clearest windows into how someone is actually doing, often more revealing than a diagnosis on a chart. A large study following community-dwelling adults over 75 found that greater independence at the start was one of the strongest predictors of staying independent 1 and 2 years later. Independence tends to reinforce itself, which is exactly why protecting it early matters so much. That same research found something worth pausing on. Depression and frailty were 2 of the biggest threats to independence, often bigger than any single physical diagnosis. Independence isn't purely physical. Mental and emotional health are woven into it just as tightly. Independence at 80 doesn't mean refusing all help. That's actually a common misconception. It means staying the one who decides. Choosing to ask a neighbor for a ride instead of losing your license entirely and your freedom along with it. Using a cane or walker not as a defeat, but as a tool that keeps you moving under your own power for longer. Setting up pill organizers and automatic bill pay not because you're failing, but because smart systems protect independence rather than replace it. The people who stay independent longest are often the ones who adapt their environment early, grab bars in the shower, better lighting, decluttered walkways, long before a fall forces the issue. That's not giving in to aging. That's staying ahead of it. Sign 3. Keeping your mind sharp. The third sign is cognitive. Memory, focus, the ability to follow a conversation, solve a problem, or learn something new. Cognitive function shows up again and again in the research as one of the strongest predictors of independence in later life, right alongside physical function. Interestingly, the two are connected. One large study of adults in their 80s found that people who felt older than their actual age tended to have measurably slower walking speed and weaker cognitive test scores than people who felt younger, even after accounting for their actual age. Mindset and cognition turn out to be tangled up with each other more than most people expect. The brain, much like a muscle, tends to hold on to function that gets used regularly. A few things consistently show up in the research. Lifelong learning, reading, puzzles, learning a language or instrument, taking a class, is associated with better cognitive function in later life. Physical exercise doesn't just help the body, it increases blood flow to the brain and is linked to better memory and slower cognitive decline. Sleep quality matters more than people assume, since deep sleep is when the brain does much of its own maintenance work. And managing cardiovascular health, blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, protects the brain, because what's good for your heart is consistently good for your brain too. If you're still able to follow a complex conversation, remember names, plan and organize your week, and pick up something new, a recipe, a card game, a piece of technology, that mental flexibility is one of the clearest markers of healthy aging. Sign 4. Staying socially connected. Here's a statistic worth sitting with. National surveys have found that roughly 1 in 3 older adults report feeling isolated. Isolation isn't just an emotional issue, it's a measurable health risk. Researchers and public health officials, including a recent U.S. Surgeon General's advisory, have identified social isolation and loneliness as a serious risk factor for older adults, linked to worse physical and mental health outcomes. One recent study following thousands of older adults found that greater social connectedness significantly lowered the odds of loneliness, and notably, that people with functional limitations were substantially more likely to report loneliness, showing how tightly physical health and social health are linked. The people who stay most connected in their 80s tend to share a few habits. Regular contact with family, whether in person or by phone or video call. A standing weekly commitment, a religious service, a card game, a walking group, a class that gets them out of the house on a schedule. And often a role that makes them feel needed, mentoring a grandchild, volunteering, or simply being the person a friend calls first. If you've still got people who check in on you, and people you check in on, that mutual, two-way connection, that's sign number 4, and it's one of the most protective of all. Sign 5. Adapting to life's challenges. This is the one most videos on this topic skip past, and it might be the most important sign of all. Resilience. The ability to absorb a hard loss, the death of a spouse, a health scare, a move out of a longtime home, and keep engaging with life afterward instead of withdrawing from it. Nobody reaches their 80s without loss. What separates people who keep thriving from people who start declining sharply often isn't whether hard things happen, it's how they respond when they do. Researchers who study successful aging point to adaptability as a defining trait, the willingness to adjust expectations, ask for help when needed, find new routines when old ones stop working, and keep finding meaning even as circumstances change. This shows up in small, concrete ways. Someone whose spouse passes away and who, after a period of real grief, joins a new social group rather than withdrawing entirely. Someone who can no longer drive at night and builds a new routine around that limit instead of stopping their evening outings altogether. Someone managing a new diagnosis who learns everything they can about it and adjusts, rather than letting it define every part of their life. Sign 6. Maintaining a positive outlook. The sixth and final sign is attitude, but not the greeting card version of just stay positive. Research on subjective age and self-perception has found something concrete. People who feel younger than their actual age tend to show better physical and cognitive function than people of the same age who feel older than they are. How you see your own aging appears to be tangled up with how your body and mind actually perform. This isn't magical thinking. Researchers believe it works partly through behavior. People with a more positive view of their own aging tend to stay more physically active, keep up medical care, and stay socially engaged, the very habits behind signs 1 through 4. Outlook and behavior reinforce each other in a loop, for better or worse. If there's one thread running through all 6 signs, it's this. Healthy aging isn't one big thing. It's a handful of ordinary daily habits: moving your body, managing your own affairs, using your mind, staying connected to people, adapting when life throws a curveball, and choosing, again and again, to stay engaged rather than to withdraw. None of these 6 signs demand perfection. Most people in their 80s who are thriving aren't doing all 6 flawlessly. They're doing most of them, most of the time, and adjusting as they go. Closing. So, out of the 6 signs we covered today, staying active, staying independent, staying sharp, staying connected, adapting to challenges, and keeping a positive outlook, how many describe you, or someone you love? Drop the number in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know which one people find hardest to hold on to, because that tells me what to cover next. If this video gave you something useful, hit like, subscribe for more on healthy aging and longevity, and share it with someone in your life who's proving, every day, what aging well actually looks like. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. End card. Educational content, not medical advice. Consult a healthcare professional for individual guidance.